Welcome to Detectives Crime Stories. In this episode, we delve into a chilling tale of deception, passion, and murder that shook the peaceful coastal town of Ocean View, Oregon. A seemingly perfect marriage crumbles under the weight of a husband's secret life, leading to a shocking act of violence that leaves a community reeling. Join us as we unravel the twisted case of the Patterson family and the deadly consequences of living a double life. Ocean View, with its picturesque beaches and charming downtown, had long been a haven for those seeking a quiet life away from the bustle of bigger cities. Nestled between the Pacific Ocean and lush coastal forests, the town of 15,000 prided itself on its close-knit community and low crime rate. It was here that Dr. James Patterson and his wife, Elizabeth, had chosen to build their life together. Dr. James Patterson, a distinguished neurosurgeon at Ocean View Memorial Hospital, was a pillar of the community. At 45, he cut an impressive figure, tall, with salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes that exuded confidence. Known for his steady hands and innovative surgical techniques, James had saved countless lives and earned the respect of both his colleagues and patients. Elizabeth Patterson, 42, was equally beloved in Ocean View. Former elementary school teacher turned children's book author, she was known for her warm smile and gentle demeanor. Her series of adventure books featuring a brave young girl named Lily the Explorer had gained popularity among local children and was beginning to attract national attention. The Pattersons lived in a beautiful craftsman-style home on Ocean View's prestigious Cliff Road, overlooking the Pacific. Their 14-year-old daughter, Sophie, was a bright and talented young girl who shared her mother's love for storytelling and her father's analytical mind. The family was completed by their golden retriever, Max, a constant companion on their weekend beach walk. To their friends and neighbors, Pattersons seemed to have it all: successful careers, a loving family, and an enviable lifestyle. James and Elizabeth were fixtures at community events, from charity galas at the Ocean View Country Club to the annual Sandcastle Festival on the beach. They hosted dinners for James' colleagues and Elizabeth's fellow authors, their home always filled with laughter and lively conversation. Elizabeth was particularly active in the community, volunteering at the local library and organizing an annual writing workshop for aspiring young authors. Kindness and enthusiasm endeared her to everyone she met. Sophie, following in her mother's footsteps, was a top student at Ocean View Middle School and had recently won the regional science fair with a project on marine ecosystem. Dr. Patterson's dedication to his work was well known. He often spent long hours at the hospital, pushing the boundaries of neurosurgery and mentoring young doctors. His colleagues admired his commitment, though some wondered how he managed to balance his demanding career with family life. Little did they know that beneath the surface of this picture-perfect existence, a storm was brewing, one that would ultimately end in tragedy. The morning of June 15, 2023, dawned bright and clear in Ocean View. The town was buzzing with preparations for the annual Summer Solstice Festival, a weekend-long celebration of art, music, and local culture. Elizabeth Patterson had been up since dawn, putting the finishing touches on her booth where she would be signing copies of her latest book. As she sipped her morning coffee on the patio, overlooking the misty ocean, Elizabeth couldn't shake a feeling of unease that had been growing over the past few months. James had been more distant lately, often coming home late and leaving early, citing complex surgeries and research projects. While she understood the demands of his profession, something felt different this time. Elizabeth's best friend and fellow author, Megan Carlson, had noticed the change too. "Are you sure everything's okay with James?" Megan had asked during their weekly coffee date at the Ocean View Cafe. "He seems distracted lately." Elizabeth had brushed off her friend's concerns, but deep down, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was amiss. She had always prided herself on the strong communication in her marriage. But lately, it felt like James was slipping away. As she prepared for the festival, Elizabeth made a mental note to talk to James that evening. They needed to reconnect, find their way back to each other. Little did she know that this conversation would never take place. Across town at Ocean View Memorial Hospital, Dr. James Patterson was just finishing up a grueling 12-hour surgery. As he scrubbed out, his mind was elsewhere, not on his wife and daughter, but on the text message burning a hole in his pocket. "We need to talk. Tonight. No more excuses." The message was from Veronica Reyes, a 38-year-old pharmaceutical sales representative who had entered James' life like a whirlwind 6 months ago. What had started as innocent flirtation during her visits to the hospital had quickly spiraled into a passionate affair. Veronica was everything Elizabeth wasn't: spontaneous, ambitious, and utterly intoxicated. James had convinced himself that he could keep his two lives separate. He loved Elizabeth and Sophie, he truly did, but Veronica awakened something in him that he thought had long been dormant. The thrill of secrecy, a rush of stolen moments. It was addictive. But now, Veronica was demanding more. She wanted him to leave Elizabeth, to start a new life together. James felt torn between his loyalty to his family and the exciting future Veronica promised. As he left the hospital, James' phone buzzed again. This time, it was Elizabeth, reminding him about the summer solstice festival. "Don't forget, we're supposed to be at my booth by 6 p.m. Sophie's so excited to help out this year." Guilt washed over James as he read the message. He typed out a quick reply. "Of course, honey. Wouldn't miss it for the world." But even as he sent the message, James knew he had no intention of going to the festival. He had already made up his mind. Tonight was the night he would end things with Veronica, once and for all. He couldn't destroy his family, couldn't give up everything he had built in Ocean View. As the sun began to set over the Pacific, casting a golden glow across Ocean View, the summer solstice festival was in full swing. The town's main street was transformed into a vibrant carnival of art, music, and local cuisine. Elizabeth's booth, decorated with colorful illustrations from her books, was bustling with young fans eager to meet their favorite author. Sophie Patterson, her long blonde hair tied back in a ponytail, was proudly assisting her mother, handing out bookmarks and chatting animatedly with other children about Lily's latest adventure. Elizabeth kept glancing at her watch, wondering where James was. It wasn't like him to be this late without calling. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, James Patterson pulled his sleek black Audi into the parking lot of the Oceanside Motel, a nondescript establishment on the outskirts of town. It was here in room 112 that he had been meeting Veronica for the past 6 months. As he knocked on the door, James steeled himself for what was to come. He had rehearsed his speech in his mind countless times on the drive over. "Veronica, this has to end. I can't leave my family. I'm sorry, but this is goodbye." The door opened, revealing Veronica Reyes. With her dark hair, olive skin, and smoldering brown eyes, she was a striking contrast to Elizabeth's fair, delicate beauty. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't show," she said, her voice a mix of relief and accusation. James stepped into the room, his resolve already wavering at the sight of her. "Veronica, we need to talk," he began. She cut him off with a passionate kiss. "Talk later," he murmured against his lips. "I've missed you." Back at the festival, Elizabeth was growing increasingly worried. She had called James multiple times. Each call went straight to voicemail. It wasn't just his absence from the event that concerned her. It was the culmination of months of distance and secrecy. "Mom, where's Dad?" Sophie asked, her excitement from earlier in the evening fading into concern. Elizabeth forced a smile. "I'm sure he's just caught up at the hospital, sweetie. You know how important his work is." But as she said the words, Elizabeth felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. Something was very wrong, and she was determined to find out what it was. As the festival wound down, Elizabeth made a decision. "Sophie, honey, why don't you go home with Aunt Megan? I need to stop by the hospital to check on your father." Megan, sensing her friend's distress, agreed to take Sophie for the night. As Elizabeth drove towards Ocean View Memorial, her mind raced with possibilities. Was James having an affair? Was he in some kind of trouble? Or was she simply overreacting, letting her imagination run wild? At the Oceanside Motel, the atmosphere in room 112 had shifted dramatically. What had started as a passionate reunion had devolved into a heated argument. "You promised me, James," Veronica shouted, tears streaming down her face. "You said you'd leave her, that we'd start a new life together." James ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "I know what I said, Veronica, but I can't do it. I have a daughter, a life in Ocean View. I can't just throw that all away." Veronica's eyes flashed with anger. "So what was I to you? Just a distraction? A midlife crisis fling?" "No, of course not," James pleaded. "You're amazing, Veronica. In another life, maybe we could have." "Don't," she cut him off. "Don't you dare try to soften this with what-ifs. You're a coward, James Patterson. A lying, cheating coward." In a fit of rage, Veronica grabbed the nearest object, a heavy glass ashtray, and hurled it at James. He ducked, and the ashtray shattered against the wall behind him. "Veronica, please calm down," James said, reaching out to her. But as he did, she pushed him away with all her strength. James, caught off guard, stumbled backward, head striking the corner of the bedside table with a sickening thud. Time seemed to stand still as James crumpled to the floor, a trickle of blood forming beneath his head. Veronica stood frozen, her anger instantly replaced by shock and horror. "James?" she whispered, kneeling beside him. "James, wake up. Oh God, please wake up." But James Patterson lay motionless, his blue eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. As this tragic scene unfolded at the Oceanside Motel, Elizabeth Patterson arrived at Ocean View Memorial Hospital. The emergency room was quiet, with only a few patients waiting to be seen. "Excuse me," Elizabeth approached the nurse at the reception desk. "I'm looking for my husband, Dr. James Patterson. Has he been here tonight?" The nurse, a kind-faced woman named Sarah, checked her computer. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Patterson, but Dr. Patterson left the hospital hours ago, right after his last surgery." Elizabeth felt her heart drop. "Are you sure? He didn't come back for any emergencies?" Sarah shook her head. "No, ma'am. Is everything all right?" Fighting back tears, Elizabeth thanked the nurse and hurried back to her car. As she sat behind the wheel, she felt lost. Where could James be? Why would he lie about working late? With shaking hands, Elizabeth pulled out her phone and dialed a number she never thought she'd have to use. "Hello, is this the Ocean View Police Department? I'd like to report my husband missing." Officer Mark Johnson took Elizabeth's call. At 32, Johnson was one of the youngest detectives on the Ocean View police force, known for his sharp mind and empathetic approach. He listened carefully as Elizabeth explained the situation, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "Mrs. Patterson, I understand you're worried," Officer Johnson said gently. "But given that your husband has only been out of contact for a few hours, we can't officially declare him missing just yet. However, I can send a patrol car to your home and check if his car is there. In the meantime, is there anywhere else he might have gone? Any friends or places he frequents?" Elizabeth racked her brain, trying to think of anywhere James might be. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. A receipt she had found in James's jacket pocket a few weeks ago. She had dismissed it at the time, but now... "The Oceanside Motel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not much, but I found a receipt from there recently. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but now..." Officer Johnson's voice sharpened with interest. "That's good information, Mrs. Patterson. I'll have a unit check it out right away. In the meantime, please go home and wait. We'll contact you as soon as we have any news." As Elizabeth drove home, her mind raced with possibilities. The Oceanside Motel was hardly the kind of place a respected neurosurgeon would have any business being. Deep down, she knew what it likely meant. She couldn't bring herself to fully accept it. Not yet. Back at the motel, Veronica Reyes was in a state of panic. James lay motionless on the floor, a pool of blood slowly spreading beneath his head. She had tried to revive him, had screamed his name, even attempted clumsy CPR, but it was clear that James Patterson was beyond help. "This can't be happening," Veronica muttered to herself, pacing the small room. "This can't be real." But it was all too real. In a matter of minutes, her life had spiraled out of control. She looked at James' body, at the man she had loved, the man she had been willing to risk everything for, and felt a wave of nausea wash over her. What should she do? Call the police? Try to hide the body? Run? Her mind raced through scenarios, each one seeming more impossible than the last. Just then, a sharp knock on the door made her jump. "Ocean View Police Department," voice called out. "We're looking for Dr. James Patterson. Is he here?" Veronica felt her world collapse around her. This was it. There was no way out. With trembling hands, she opened the door. Officer Sarah Chen, a rookie cop on her first year with the Ocean View PD, was not prepared for the scene that greeted her. A distraught woman, her mascara streaked with tears, and behind her, the unmistakable form of a body on the floor. "Ma'am, please step aside," Officer Chen said, her training kicking in despite her shock. She radioed for backup and an ambulance, even though she could tell from a glance that it was too late for the man on the floor. As Officer Chen secured the scene, Veronica Reyes sank to the ground, her legs no longer able to support her. "It was an accident," she kept repeating. "I didn't mean to. Oh God, I didn't mean to." Within minutes, the quiet Oceanside motel was transformed into a hive of activity. Police cars and an ambulance crowded the parking lot, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow in the night. Crime scene technicians arrived, methodically documenting and collecting evidence from room 112. Detective Mark Johnson arrived on the scene, his face grim as he surveyed the room. Dr. James Patterson, a man he had always respected, lay dead on the cheap motel carpet, his secret life exposed in the most tragic way possible. As the police worked, word began to spread through Ocean View. In a small town, news, especially bad news, travels fast. By midnight, most of the town knew that Dr. James Patterson, the beloved neurosurgeon, was dead, found in a motel room with a woman who wasn't his wife. Elizabeth Patterson received the news from Detective Johnson himself, who came to her home to deliver the grim information. As he spoke, explaining in gentle terms what they had found, Elizabeth felt as if she were underwater, the detective's words muffled and distant. "Mrs. Patterson," Detective Johnson said, his voice breaking through her shock, "I know this is a lot to process, but we need to ask you some questions. Did you have any knowledge of your husband's relationship with Ms. Reyes?" Elizabeth shook her head, still struggling to comprehend the reality of the situation. "No," she whispered, "I had no idea. I knew something was wrong, but this? How could he do this to us?" As the night wore on, the investigation into James Patterson's death continued. Veronica Reyes was taken into custody, her story of an accidental death during an argument corroborated by the physical evidence. The district attorney would later charge her with involuntary manslaughter, a lesser charge than murder, but one that still carried significant prison time. The next few days were a blur for Elizabeth and Sophie Patterson. They retreated to their home, shielded from the media frenzy by friends and family. Megan Carlson became a constant presence, handling calls and visitors, ensuring that mother and daughter had the space they needed to grieve. The town of Ocean View was left reeling from the scandal. The Summer Solstice Festival, which should have been a joyous celebration, was overshadowed by the tragic events at the Oceanside Motel. Whispers and rumors spread through the community as people struggled to reconcile the image of Dr. James Patterson, respected surgeon and family man, with the reality of his secret affair and untimely death. At Ocean View Memorial Hospital, James's colleagues were in shock. Dr. Sarah Thompson, the chief of neurosurgery and James's mentor, called an emergency staff meeting to address the situation. "We've lost not just a brilliant surgeon," she said, her voice thick with emotion, but a friend and colleague. "However, we must remember that our primary duty is to our patients. They need us now more than ever." The hospital administration scrambled to reassign James's patients and adjust schedules. Many of his patients, upon hearing the news, requested transfers to other doctors, unable to reconcile their trust in him with the circumstances of his death. As the days passed, more details of James' double life came to light. Detective Johnson and his team uncovered a trail of hidden bank accounts and suspicious transactions. It appeared that James had been embezzling funds from the hospital's research grant, using the money to finance his affair with Veronica and to invest in high-risk stocks. This revelation hit Elizabeth like a second blow. Not only had James betrayed their marriage, but he had also compromised his professional integrity. The man she thought she knew seemed to be vanishing before her eyes, replaced by a stranger she never truly understood. Sophie, at 14, struggled to comprehend the complexities of the situation. She alternated between anger at her father for his betrayal, overwhelming grief at his loss. Elizabeth did her best to support her daughter, even as she grappled with her own tumultuous emotions. The funeral for Dr. James Patterson was a somber and tense affair. The large crowd that gathered at Ocean View Cemetery was a testament to the impact James had had on the community. There was an undercurrent of discomfort and whispered conversations. Elizabeth and Sophie sat in the front row, their faces masks of grief and dignity. As the service concluded, Elizabeth stood to address the gathered mourners. Her voice, though soft, carried clearly across the silent cemetery. James was many things to many people, she began. A skilled surgeon, a respected colleague, friend. To Sophie and me, he was husband and father. We loved him, and we thought we knew him. Today, we lay to rest not just James, but also the image we held of him. It's a double loss, and one that will take time to fully comprehend. She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. But even in our grief and confusion, we must remember the good that James did. The lives he saved, the people he helped. His actions in the last months of his life do not erase the years of dedication and service. As we move forward, we will choose to honor the best parts of James, while acknowledging the flaws that led to this tragedy. Her words, raw and honest, moved many to tears. Even those who had come to the funeral, conflicted about James's legacy, found themselves touched by Elizabeth's grace in the face of such betrayal. In the weeks that followed, Elizabeth and Sophie began the difficult process of rebuilding their lives. Publicity surrounding James's death had made it challenging for them to find peace in Ocean View. Everywhere they went, they felt the weight of curious stares and whispered conversations. Elizabeth made the difficult decision to put their house on Cliff Road up for sale. "We need a fresh start," she told Sophie one evening as they sat on their patio, watching the sun set over the Pacific for one of the last times. "Somewhere we can heal without constantly being reminded of what happened." Sophie nodded, her young face serious beyond her years. "Where will we go, Mom?" Elizabeth managed a small smile. "I've been thinking about that writing retreat I attended last year in Colorado. Remember how I told you about the beautiful mountains and the quiet little town? I think it could be a good place for us to start over." As they prepared for their move, Elizabeth threw herself into finishing her latest book. Writing had always been her escape, and now it became her lifeline. She poured her pain, confusion, and hope for the future into her words, creating a story of resilience and redemption that would later become her most acclaimed work. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings against Veronica Reyes moved forward. The trial was set for the fall, and Elizabeth wrestled with whether or not to attend. On one hand, she wanted to understand fully what had happened that night at the Oceanside Motel. On the other, she feared that hearing the details would only bring more pain. In the end, Elizabeth decided to send a written statement at the trial, choosing to focus on her and Sophie's healing rather than reliving the tragedy in court. Veronica Reyes, for her part, pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter. During her sentencing hearing, she turned to face Elizabeth, who had decided to attend this final proceeding. "Mrs. Patterson," Veronica said, her voice trembling, "I know that nothing I can say will undo the pain I've caused you and your daughter. I love James, but what we did was wrong. I will carry the guilt of my actions for the rest of my life. I am truly sorry." Elizabeth met Veronica's gaze steadily, her expression a complex mixture of pain, anger, and something approaching understanding. She gave a small nod, acknowledging Veronica's words without offering forgiveness. It was perhaps the most she could manage at that moment. The judge sentenced Veronica to 7 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5 years. As she was led away, Elizabeth felt a weight lift from her shoulders. This chapter, at least, was closed. As summer turned to fall, Elizabeth and Sophie prepared for their move to Colorado. The sale of their house, gone through quickly, with many in Ocean View seeing it as a chance to own a piece of what had become local legend. On their last night in town, Megan organized a small farewell gathering at her home. The Pattersons' closest friends came to offer their support and say goodbye. There were tears and hugs, promises to stay in touch, and reminders that they would always have a home in Ocean View if they chose to return. Dr. Sarah Thompson pulled Elizabeth aside during the party. "I want you to know," she said quietly, "that we've established a scholarship in James' name at the hospital. Despite everything, we want to honor the good work he did and ensure his legacy helps future generations of doctors." Elizabeth felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you, Sarah. I think he would have liked that." As they drove out of Ocean View the next morning, Elizabeth and Sophie watched the familiar streets and buildings pass by for the last time. The town that had been their home for so long now felt like a place from another life. "Are you okay, sweetie?" Elizabeth asked, glancing at her daughter in the passenger seat. Sophie was quiet for a moment before responding. "I think so, Mom. I'm sad to leave, but I'm also kind of excited for our new start. Do you think Dad would have understood?" Elizabeth reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "I think your father would want us to be happy, Sophie, wherever we are." As they passed the "Thank you for visiting Ocean View" sign on the outskirts of town, Elizabeth felt a mix of sadness and hope. The road ahead was uncertain. They were facing it together. In Colorado, Elizabeth and Sophie found the fresh start they were looking for. They settled into a cozy cabin on the outskirts of a small mountain town, surrounded by pine forests and breathtaking views. The change of scenery brought with it a sense of peace that had eluded them in Ocean View. Elizabeth's new book, loosely based on their experiences, was published to critical acclaim. Titled After the Storm, it told the story of a woman rebuilding her life after a profound betrayal. The book resonated with readers around the country, many of whom reached out to Elizabeth to share their own stories of loss and renewal. Sophie, too, began to flourish in their new environment. She joined the local high school's debate team and discovered a passion for environmental science, inspired by the natural beauty surrounding their new home. Back in Ocean View, life gradually returned to normal, though the town would never quite forget the tragedy that had unfolded that summer. The Pattersons' old house on Cliff Road became something of a local attraction, with new owners often finding curious onlookers pausing to stare as they passed by. Ocean View Memorial Hospital implemented stricter oversight measures for their research grants, determined to prevent any future embezzlement. The James Patterson Memorial Scholarship became a prestigious award, helping promising young medical students pursue their dreams of becoming neurosurgeons. Veronica Reyes served her time quietly, using her years in prison to reflect on her actions and their consequences. Upon her release, she chose to move far away from Ocean View, hoping to start anew, just as Elizabeth and Sophie had done. 5 years after that fateful night at the Oceanside Motel, Elizabeth received an unexpected letter. It was from James' mother, Eleanor, with whom she had lost touch after the move to Colorado. "Dear Elizabeth," the letter began, "I hope this finds you and Sophie well. I've been following your success with your books, and am so proud of how you've both carried on. I'm writing because we recently discovered some old letters James had written but never sent. I thought you might want to have them." With trembling hands, Elizabeth opened the enclosed envelope. Inside were several handwritten pages in James's familiar script. The letters, dated from the months before his death, revealed a man torn between his love for his family and the excitement of his affair, grappling with guilt and uncertainty. In the final letter, never completed, James had written, "Elizabeth, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to put these words on paper. I've made a terrible mistake. The life I've built with you and Sophie is everything to me, and I've risked it all for, what? A fantasy? An escape? I'm ending things with Veronica. I only hope that when I tell you the truth, you'll find it in your heart to forgive me. I love you, and I'm so sorry." Tears streamed down Elizabeth's face as she read the words James never had the chance to say. The letter didn't erase the pain of his betrayal, but it offered a glimpse into his state of mind in those final days. It was, in its way, a form of closure. That evening, Elizabeth sat with Sophie on the porch of their Colorado home, watching the sun set behind the mountains. She shared the contents of James's letters with her daughter, answering her questions as honestly as she could. "Do you think things would have been different if Dad had told you the truth?" Sophie asked, her voice small. Elizabeth considered the question carefully. "I don't know, sweetheart. I'd like to think we could have worked through it, but the truth is, we'll never know. What I do know is that your father loved us, even when he made terrible mistakes." Sophie leaned against her mother's shoulder. "I miss him sometimes. Is that okay?" "Of course it is," Elizabeth assured her, wrapping an arm around her daughter. "We can miss him and be angry at him at the same time. Feelings are complicated like that." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elizabeth reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The pain of James' betrayal and loss would always be a part of their story, but it no longer defined them. They had forged a new life, one filled with hope and possibility. In Ocean View, the case of Dr. James Patterson and his tragic downfall had become local legend, a cautionary tale whispered about at dinner parties and discussed in hushed tones at the hospital. But for Elizabeth and Sophie, it was a chapter in their lives that had closed. They had found their way forward, carrying with them the memories of happier times and the lessons learned from the darker days. As they sat together on that porch in Colorado, mother and daughter, they were no longer running from their past. They were simply living, one day at a time, in a present they had built for themselves. And in that moment, under the vast starry sky, they felt a sense of peace that had been long in coming, but was all the more precious for the journey it took to find it.